Our big problem is that we worship cleverness, and cleverness is no good when it comes to the real problems in life, the significant problems. Cleverness is great for superficial, ten-a-penny problems. So we've put ourselves in this position where we think that it's as if we think that the only problems, all problems, are actually superficial, and there's no problems that aren't susceptible to being fixed with cleverness. This comes across as a type of optimism that we can solve everything. So that's considered to be a good approach. The approach of there's always a solution. So people say there's no such thing as a problem without a solution. And in a kind of a way, that feels good for us to hear people going around saying that. It buoys us up a bit. It's total bullshit, of course. So there is always that. Ultimately, all of the big problems are absolutely insoluble. Absolutely insoluble. And that's why it's not great that we worship cleverness, because we cling to the hope that if we're clever enough, devious enough, tricky enough, we can get around them. And so we spend an awful lot of time trying to get clever enough to solve our problems, trying this and trying that, and getting very caught up in it. And the problem with that is the problem with thinking that every problem has a solution is that we get stuck into the problems trying to solve them. And when we get stuck into the problems, whatever problems they are, trying to solve them, we lose perspective. So we can imagine that there is this stuff, this commodity, which we can call perspective. And it evaporates like that when we actually start arguing with something. So you can think of two people that are irritating each other and they just lock horns and they get into an argument. When this happens, all perspective disappears. That's why an argument works so well. If there's perspective, there would be a bit of humor in it. We could both reflect on the humor of the situation and how stupid we are to be arguing, which would bring all that. It would be a level of consciousness that would make the argument quite meaningless. But the thing about arguing is that we bring the points to which the argument are relating, we bring them into total focus. So the argument, any argument, is always about some kind of black and white representation of things. We can't argue about intangibles. We can't argue about stuff that we don't really know about. How would I argue about it? I wouldn't know where to start. I just wouldn't know where to start. So we really can't argue about intangibles and indefinables. So we bring something completely into definition and make some kind of concrete statement about it. And then you can argue with me and I can argue with you, all on the basis of a concrete statement. So we have to have concrete statements in order to argue. Once we tune into this world that is created out of concrete statements, that's all we can see. We can just see that particular viewpoint, and it covers all of our, it stretches from horizon to horizon. We can't see anything else. We can't see, crucially, the way in which all of our concrete statements about the world and ourselves simply aren't true. Concrete statements can never be true, because there's no such thing as concrete statements, because there's no such thing as concrete anything. That's just a function of the way our thinking mind likes to reduce everything and simplify everything into a kind of a clunky kind of clumsy kind of mechanical representation of things, which doesn't really exist. purely a function of our oversimplification of reality. So there we are. We've lost our perspective. We've got sewn into this one particular viewpoint that's made out of black and white statements. And there's nothing else to do but argue. And that argument will never be solved because, as Einstein says, we can never solve a problem using the thinking that created that problem in the first place. So really it's a stalemate. When we argue, we enter into a stalemate because it can go on forever, as we all know, in a kind of pantomime sense. I say, no, it isn't. And you say, yes, it is. And this really pisses me off. And I say, no, it isn't. And then you get even more pissed off. You say, yes, it is. Where does that stop? It doesn't stop ever. Ever, ever, ever. It doesn't stop ever. That's just a plus minus reverberation. Plus minus reverberations are famous. They can carry on forever and ever. They don't prove anything apart from the fact of how stupid it all is. So in a sense, we could say that a kind of eternal argument of yes, it is, no, it isn't, proves the stupidity of the argument. But it doesn't even prove that unless we have the perspective to step outside of that argument and see, oh my God, this is so stupid. But on that level, when there's no perspective, there's no resolution, because we cannot see beneath the presented reality, the surface level reality. Because in order to do that, we have to have perspective. In order to have perspective, we have to stop engaging, we have to stop quarreling, we have to just shut it and just notice what's happening, notice ourselves, just take an interest in why the hell am I arguing? Why does it matter to me so much? What am I doing? Why is this so extremely important to me? Once we start to look at things in that way, we get the perspective. It's like we're up in the air a little bit and we can look down on ourselves and we see it's not actually important to win the argument at all because it's a bullshit argument. That's a very important thing to get to understand about any argument at all. Like if I go out on a limb and I say that Batman could beat up Superman any day, no problem. You could come along and try to prove to me that I'm wrong and that actually Superman could kick Batman's ass any time. What the hell can Batman do anyway, apart from fucking swing from office block to office block? But even though we could get stuck into this and stand in the middle of the street for days arguing about it and getting more and more annoyed, it's also possible, were we to reflect on what we're doing, it's also possible for us to perceive quite clearly that this argument is entirely 100% totally immaculately stupid, and we know that. Two people come to blows over whether Superman could beat up Batman, and they get really riled up about it, hot under the collar, and really, really upset about it. That's comedy. That's stupid. It's pure dumb stupidity. And apart from the two lads that are arguing because they've lost all perspective and they can't see what a joke it is, they can't see what total fools they are. If they could, well, on the one hand, there's a kind of painful aspect of realizing, oh my God, I'm such a fool. Okay, that's a bit painful. But at the same time, there's a release in it because you're no longer compelled to be this fool without knowing you're a fool. Because if you know you're a fool, you can't really carry on being a fool because it's just too dumb, too stupid. But we're not really addressing the issue of what to do if someone comes up to you on the street and tries to engage you in an argument about superheroes. Like, that's not really what we're... If somebody does, okay, that's relevant. Our conversation is relevant to that if they do. But what we're really talking about is the argument that goes on in our head. And the argument or perhaps a better way of putting it would be to say the argument that we have with reality the whole time. This should be this, that should be that, and it isn't. So we get stuck on stuff like that. All the issues we have, all the problems we have, ultimately are due to us wanting things to be different from the way they actually are. So we argue with it. And the way we argue is by trying to solve the problem. So a problem comes along, I try to solve it, try and fix it. I try to make the problem go away so I can go back to how I was before, when everything was great and there wasn't this problem. And so this has a bearing on how we deal with things that are upsetting our peace of mind, things that are upsetting us and causing us emotional pain, mental health problems, if you wanted to call it that. So our whole instinct is to use every last bit of cleverness we've got, collectively bring in the really super intellectual, clever academic types, get them to think about it a lot and come up with some answer, and the rest of us will kind of listen to what they say and try and use their answer. And that sounds like a kind of very simplistic way of explaining it, and it's kind of simplistic, but it's also true because that's what we do in mental health. Absolutely is what we do. We get some people that are kind of intellectually overdeveloped, and we try to get them to think about life, and we call them professors and whatever, and then they think about it and give us some answers. But the problem is, after coming at this whole kind of point in a very kind of slow way and beating around the bush in the process a bit, the problem is that all of our neurotic mental health problems are caused by lack of perspective, which is caused by us taking the thinking mind too seriously and tuning in too much to its productions, to its to the conditioned realities it provides us with. When we tune in too much, we lose the ability to see that the conditioned reality is only a conditioned reality, that the productions of thought are just productions of thought. So on the one hand, we want to tune in because the better we are at tuning in, the more likely we are to be able to suss what's going on and solve it, which is the same as saying the better we know a game, we know the rules of the game, the more likely we are to win the game. So we invest totally. We put all our eggs in this basket. We totally invest in the picture of the world that the thinking mind shows us, because from the logic of the thinking mind, if we can really tune into that and really focus and bring it into clear definition in front of us, then we're more likely to be able to fix it. In actual fact, that's not true, though, because nothing can be fixed. No problem can be fixed within the terms of the thoughts, the thinking that actually created it. You just go around in circles forever and ever. It's impossible to fix it. It's a pure immaculate impossibility. We might deny that and say, no, it can be fixed. But look at Einstein's there telling you no, it bloody can't. So at least listen to him a little bit. Maybe he's right. Maybe he's right about that. And it's not just Einstein. Lots of people have said this. Carl Jung said exactly the same thing. That you can never solve a neurotic conflict, because the attempt to solve a neurotic conflict is the neurotic conflict. The only resolution is when we realize how stupid it is, and we no longer bother our asses about it so much. We no longer put ourselves through the ringer trying to solve it. So the only answer to anything is perspective, but it isn't really an answer, because it's not a response to the problem. Because if we respond to the problem in that way, we're taking it seriously, we're arguing on the terms of that problem, or on the terms that that problem assumes implicitly. In order for it to be a problem, it has to assume some terms. We have to assume those terms as well in order to take it as a problem. So it's not an answer. It's not a blah, 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 you're suffering from whatever, and neurosis, blah, blah, blah. Get some perspective. That's the thing to do, because that's pure dharma. That's not how you get perspective. Perspective isn't a thing that you get. It's perspective is when we transcend our whole frame of reference, and there's nothing in the frame of reference that can help us to transcend it, to transcend that frame of reference. All the stuff that's in the frame of reference merely serves to recapitulate or repeat or reiterate that frame of reference. There is never anything at all within a particular framework of thinking that can be used to help us get out of that framework of thinking. That is the immaculate impossibility. That doesn't mean we can't transcend it, but we can't transcend thought by using thought. We can't get rid of our dysfunctional thinking by using our dysfunctional thinking. And all thinking is dysfunctional because all thinking is blind. Thinking only works when you take a very, very narrow viewpoint of things and exclude everything else and pretend it doesn't exist. Because that way you've made a nice oversimplified or decomplexified universe. Kind of like a pretend universe that's so much simpler that we can actually solve it, and we go, yay, we can solve it because we've created an oversimplified universe for ourselves. That isn't really real, but the good thing about it is we can solve it. In psychotherapy, they call this pseudo-solution. It has all the pleasure of solving something, but it's pseudo because we're solving nothing, but it feels like we are, so it's kind of great in a way. But the problem with pseudo-solution is it doesn't solve anything, and so we carry out our pseudo-solution strategy, whatever the hell that is. Could be anything at all. It doesn't really matter because it doesn't matter if it works or not. It's just supposed to stand for the solution of something. And then I have to do it again and again and again and again and again and again because it doesn't work, so I have to keep on doing it. And that's neurosis, getting caught in this loop, getting caught in a pattern of dysfunctional fixing that actually creates the problem in the first place, which goes on forever and ever and ever. So much as we might like to use this insight, that perspective is the answer, the so-called answer in a way, to our mental suffering, we can't put it in an equation. We can't turn it into a formula. Like blah, 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 blah. When this happens, then get perspective. Because, for the reasons I've just said, the particular framework of thinking that we're trapped in wants us to believe that we can use it in order to escape the problems that are generated by the lack of perspective inherent in that literal way of looking at the world. So it kind of presents itself as, yes, I can solve that problem. Secretly, though, what's happening, it's sewing us in deeper into this situation where we can only see things the one way, and it's a dead end because it isn't a real way. It's just a kind of logical maze that we can get lost in forever. So neurosis is where we keep on throwing everything we've got, whatever the problem is, without transcending at all. We're just trying to fix it on the level at which it presents, taking it seriously, which is playing the game. And the basic thing here that's going on is that we've got the notion that if we play the game well enough, skillfully enough, determinedly enough, then we'll get rid of that damn game, we'll win it and it'll go away, and I've solved it. But that is the number one delusion associated with games, because a game can never take us beyond itself. It can show us a door marked winning and say to us, look, walk through that door and it's going to be so great because you'll be a winner, you'll have won the game. You can ascend to the next level or whatever, you become an ascended master or whatever. But that's a trick. We go through that door, if we manage to do the right things, and we come back into that same situation again because the door leads back onto itself. Because the only way we can win a game is by taking that game, by tuning into it, by focusing in on it completely, taking it for granted that the game is what we need to know about. So we play the game on the terms of the game, and if we play it really well, we do not exit the game. We can only exit the game by realizing that the game, like all games, is totally stupid. It's a surrogate for reality. It stands for something without admitting it stands for something. It's a pseudo-solution. All games are pseudo-solutions. We oversimplify the world so that we can crudely solve it. And this is something human beings always do. And my favourite example is Mrs. Thatcher, when she reckoned that crime is due to bad people, not God forbid, it's not due to the society being screwed up, being biased and weighted, being a kind of a weighted game that is weighted so that only the rich and the powerful ever win it. It's got nothing to do with that. Crimes are due to bad people. This is the agency thing. So we punish those bad people really, really hard, and we've solved the problem. And when we express it like this, it sounds so great. We feel really enthused by it. It's like, yes, let's go and find those bad people and kick the shite out of them. And it's great because it's an oversimplification of reality, that when we dumb ourselves down enough, it seems to be true, i.e. realistically reasonable. And then we can run ahead and do the thing that we're supposed to do to make everything all right, which we enjoy doing because we can actually really get off on doing it. But the whole thing's totally stupid. It's a game. It was never designed to have any effect on reality. It was designed to allow us to think that we can fix things and get off on that feeling of control, which is an illusion. That's Mrs. Thatcher. That's the example involving Mrs. Thatcher and how to deal with crime by punishing the wrongdoers very, very seriously. It's got an appeal. Populist leaders will say variations on that every single time, and because we don't want to see that actually there are no easy answers, we'll buy into that. And so all this activity will follow on from that, where there's nothing else in it but pure senseless violence and aggression and frustration, and nothing emerges from that. It's just ongoing conflict. And we descend into pure stupidity. What would be needed would be for us to give up this urge we have to do some sort of action that will bring instant relief. And instead of that, which is so tempting because we want that relief, which is the same thing as wanting to go through that door marked you. This is the door winners go through to go to the next level and to ascend to whatever exalted state follows that. The desire for a quick answer, which we bring about via some kind of logical procedure, not through having more perspective, which means actually becoming conscious, not through being conscious, not through having more awareness of what's going on, not through becoming a bit wiser, but through becoming more tricky, having more tricks, being cleverer, but absolutely being as dumb as ever. Because as Gurdjieff says, it's not clever to be too clever.